Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 769, and today is March 12th, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. Got a good amount of news to talk about on today's show, but first I want to mention at the Libertarian Institute, we are holding our 2025 fundraiser. And so right now we have $25,000 in matching funds, which means some very generous donors came in, offered large sums of money if we could get individual contributors to match that donation. We're getting pretty close to that $25,000 matching funds goal, so head on over and help us out today. When you do donate, there are a lot of gifts that we could send you, including a signed copy of Provote, which I know many of you really enjoy that book, and so you might want your own signed copy from Scott Horton on your bookshelf, and you could get one by making a donation to the Institute today. Other than that, just the normal stuff, guys. Subscribe to the Kyle Anzalone Show. That's my new show. We're going to be doing an episode at 4:45 today. Additionally, you can subscribe to this show on YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee, anywhere you listen to audio podcasts. And follow me on Twitter at @KyleAnzalone_. Let's get into the news today. All right. Trump says arrest of green card holder for pro-Palestinian activism is the first of many to come. So President Trump on Monday vowed that his arrest of a green card holder over his involvement in political protests critical of Israel was the first of many to come, as civil liberty groups are pushing back against the campaign that has chilling implications on the First Amendment. Over the weekend, Mahmoud Khalil, a recent Columbia grad student who served as a spokesman for student activities seeking the university's divestment from Israel, was detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, agents in his university-owned apartment. For now, a federal judge is preventing Khalil from being deported. So Judge Jesse Furman of the Southern District of New York said in a court order that to preserve the court's jurisdiction pending a ruling on the petition, petitioner shall not be removed from the United States unless the court orders otherwise. When he was arrested, Khalil was told he was under orders from the State Department. His visa would be revoked for his participation in the protest. He informed the agents he had a green card, making him a permanent resident, and was told that it would be revoked. Khalil, an Algerian citizen of Palestinian descent, is married to an American citizen who is 8 months pregnant. He has been taken to an ICE detention facility in Louisiana, 1,000 miles away from his wife in New York City, and has not been charged with any crime. The Department of Homeland Security has only alleged that he led Hamas-aligned protests and that it targeted Khalil in his support of President Trump's executive order prohibiting anti-Semitism, referring to an order from January meant to crack down on pro-Palestinian protests on college campuses. So President Trump wrote on Truth Social, following my previous signed executive order, ICE proudly apprehended and detained Mohammed Khalil, a radical foreign pro-Hamas student on the campus of Columbia University. This is the first arrest of many to come. We know that there are more students at Columbia and other universities across the country who have engaged in pro-terrorist, anti-Semitic, and anti-American activity, and the Trump administration will not tolerate it. On Sunday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio posted a story on X about Khalil being arrested and wrote, "We will be revoking visa and or green card holders of Hamas supporters in America so they can be deported." The term Hamas supporter has not been defined by the administration, and critics of U.S. policy for Israel and Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories are often labeled pro-Hamas. The Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, or FIRE, sent a letter to the Trump administration demanding answers about Khalil's arrest. The statement said, demonstrations occurring on Columbia's campus since October 7, 2023 have included both constitutionally protected speech and unlawful conduct, but the government has not made the clear or factual legal basis for Mr. Khalil's arrest. The statement the government has released suggests its decision may be based on his constitutionally protected speech. This lack of clarity is chilling protected expression, as other permanent residents cannot know whether their lawful speech could be deemed aligned to a terrorist organization and jeopardize their lawful status. Janice Eunice, a civil liberties attorney, said in a post on X that Khalil's arrest was political prosecution and pointed to the fact that green card holders can't be deported without a conviction. Green card holders cannot be deported for mere charges, only actual convictions of crimes of moral turpitude or aggravated felonies. Those are defined in Fed immigration law, and Khalil hasn't even been charged. These are all major red flags that this is an attempt to punish someone for expressing views disfavored by the current administration and scare others with similar views into silence. Joseph Hawley, a professor at Columbia, defended Khalil in comments to the New York Times, saying it was unfair to depict him as a dangerous person. This is not someone who seeks mediated resolutions through speech and dialogue. This is not someone who engages in violence or gets people riled up to do dangerous things. So it's really disturbing to see this kind of misrepresentation here. And of course, I think for the Trump administration, you would have to consider what would happen if this was the Obama administration, and rather than being pro-Palestinian protesters, it was a group of protesters, say, against, performing trans operations on minors or anyone. Of course, they would absolutely lose their mind and see that this is a clear violation of the First Amendment. All right, bad news from Donald Trump today, and plenty of it. Trump says the U.S. can't cut military spending now. President Trump said in an interview that aired Sunday he would like to cut military spending but couldn't do it now. The president denied that he said he wanted to cut military spending, despite his recent suggestion that the U.S., Russia, and China could work out a three-way deal to slash their military budgets in half. He said in an interview on Fox News, "I have never said cut, not in these days. I'd love to cut defense spending, but not now, because you have China, you have Russia, you have a lot of problems out there." The president has backed a House GOP budget plan that would increase the military budget by $100 billion, and has also ordered the development of a massive new missile defense system for the U.S., dubbed the Iron Dome for America, which will come with a huge price tag. In the interview, Trump acknowledged that he has been talking about the cost and risk of nuclear weapons. "What I have said is that we spend a lot of money on nuclear missiles, nuclear weapons. The level of destruction is beyond anything you can even imagine. It's just bad that everybody has to spend all this money on something that, if used, is probably going to end the world." The president has suggested several times that he could work with Russia and China on a deal to denuclearize. He said last week it would be great if everybody got rid of their nuclear weapons. As things stand, the statement of arms control is not looking promising, as the only treaty remains between the U.S. and Russia is the New START treaty, which is due to expire next year with no replacement. Next up here, Marco Rubio says 83% of USAID programs are getting canceled. He said that 5,200 contracts are not canceled, spent tens of billions of dollars in ways that did not serve and in some cases even harmed the core national interests of the United States of America. Now, the problem with that is that there's currently a continuing resolution bill moving through the House, and a continuing resolution bill just keeps the government funded at the current levels. And so we've already had a federal judge order Trump to go ahead and distribute these funds because the Congress had appropriated them, and the president can't just not distribute funds that the Congress had appropriated for specific programs. And rather than trying to actually go through and redo the budget in a way that reflects what he wants, Trump is pushing through this continuing resolution and is in fact ruthlessly attacking Kentucky Representative Thomas Massie over this issue. And so I find it just, very odd that he says he wants to cut USAID and at the same time is calling for continuing funding USAID at the same levels. All right. Worst news we have on today's show: U.S. resumes military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine. The Trump administration has lifted a pause on military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine following talks between U.S. and Ukrainian officials in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday. U.S. officials said the move came after Ukraine signaled it was open to a 30-day ceasefire if Russia agreed. So the U.S. and Ukraine said in a joint statement, Ukraine expressed readiness to accept the U.S. proposal to enact an immediate interim 30-day ceasefire, which can be extended by mutual agreement of the parties and which is subject to acceptance and concurrent implementation by the Russian Federation. The United States will communicate to Russia that Russian reciprocity is the key to achieving peace. The United States will immediately lift a pause on intelligence sharing and resume security assistance to Ukraine. The joint statement said both countries' presidents agreed to conclude as soon as possible a comprehensive agreement for developing Ukraine's critical mineral resources to expand Ukraine's economy and guarantee Ukraine's long-term prosperity and security. So far, there has been no official reaction from Moscow. Russian President Vladimir Putin has previously rejected the idea of a temporary ceasefire, stating in January that he wouldn't accept some kind of respite for regrouping forces and rearmament with the aim of subsequently continuing the conflict, and he wanted long-term peace based on the respect for legitimate interests of all people, all nations living in this region. Moscow has also has the momentum on the battlefield as its forces are making gains. More about that shortly. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the talks that the U.S. will bring proposal to Moscow. Rubio explained, "We are going to tell them this is what's on the table. Ukraine is ready to stop shooting and start talking. Now it will be up to them to say yes or no. If they say no, then we'll unfortunately know what the impediment to peace is here." So Ukrainian President Zelensky has repeatedly rejected the idea of a ceasefire, and his openness to the 30-day truce marks a significant shift in his opinion. U.S. officials said the pause in U.S. military aid and intelligence sharing will only be lifted after Ukraine made it clear it was willing to work towards peace, and my guess is that's what happened here. So National Security Mike Waltz said after the talks, the Ukrainian delegation today made something very clear. They share President Donald Trump's vision for peace. He said the two sides got into substantive details on how this war is going to end permanently, including the idea of long-term security guarantees. So it'll be very interesting to see what was actually discussed behind the scenes. And I do wonder if maybe the Ukrainians were successful in moving the Americans more so than the Americans were successful in moving the Ukrainian position. And if the Ukrainian position wasn't moved, I think that makes any deal with Russia fairly unlikely. All right, next up here, Russia claims rapid advance in Kursk. Moscow is reporting that the Russian military drove Ukrainian forces out of 12 villages in the Kursk Oblast. Last year, Ukraine seized a large swath of the sparsely defended Russian territory. In a statement released on Tuesday, the Russian Defense Ministry claimed the units of the North Group of troops during the offensive liberated 12 settlements and more than 100 square kilometers of the Kursk region. Moscow also reported gains in Ukraine, with the Defense Ministry declaring control over the Grokogo in Donetsk, and so that's a village in that territory. While President Trump says ending the war in Ukraine is a top priority, the intensity of the conflict has been escalating. Over the past week, Moscow and Kiev have launched major drone and missile attacks targeting energy infrastructure. On Monday night into Tuesday, Ukrainian forces launched their largest drone assault on Russia since the start of the war. Over 300 drones targeted a number of targets in Kursk and Moscow regions of Russia. One of the targets was the Druzhba oil pipeline that brought oil from Russia to Hungary, which angered Budapest. The head of Russia's State Duma Defense Committee argued that Moscow should deploy one of its most advanced weapons platforms to target Ukraine in response. The decision is up to the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, Russian President Vladimir Putin, but I would think it would not be unreasonable to launch the Oreshnik better even more than one. And of course, the Oreshnik is Russia's new intermediate range missile. I do think it has strategic capabilities, but even without a strategic warhead, is a very, very powerful weapon. So with fighting escalating across the front lines, the U.S. and Ukrainian officials met in Saudi Arabia. Following the summit, Washington and Kiev issued a statement saying the Ukrainian delegation was receptive to a 30-day ceasefire proposal. Additionally, Trump reversed his block on military aid and intelligence sharing for Ukraine. And then on the pipeline, Budapest blasts Kiev over attack on Russian pipeline, bringing oil to Hungary. So Budapest voices opposition to Ukrainian attacks on Russian pipelines that bring oil into Hungary. An Ukrainian attack on the pipeline briefly paused oil deliveries to Hungary. So on Tuesday, Ukraine conducted its largest ever attack on Russia, firing over 300 drones. While Moscow claimed success in downing the UAVs, some hit their targets, killing at least 3 people. Also hit was a measuring station on the Druzhba oil pipeline that brings oil from Russia to Hungary. The Hungarian foreign minister responded to the attack by calling on Kiev to halt attacks on energy infrastructure that brings oil into Hungary. Hungary imports most of its oil through the pipeline, and the pipeline was once again operational by Tuesday afternoon. So the Hungarian foreign minister said, "We consider the attacks directed against the energy infrastructure of Hungary unacceptable. We call on the Ukrainians not to attack the energy infrastructure headed towards Hungary. Hungary cannot be blamed for the war between Russia and Ukraine. Hungary is not responsible for this war." While Kiev and Budapest came to an agreement last year that allowed oil to continue to flow through Ukraine's section of the Druzhba pipeline, Ukrainian sanctions minister accused Hungary of using the pipeline problem as an argument to block the continuation of sanctions. There is some concern within the European Union that Hungary could end the blocked sanctions on Russia. Next week, the sanctions, which must be reapproved by every member of the European Union every 6 months, are set to expire. Members of the EU and Ukrainian officials are concerned that Hungarian President Viktor Orban will vote against maintaining the sanctions. The Ukrainian official claimed Budapest's policy was undermining the unity of the EU. And so this is interesting, Hungary's opposition here. We'll see if they actually do end up getting rid of the sanctions. In the past, rather than actually going and trying to get rid of the sanctions, Orban is mostly just looking for concessions from the rest of the bloc. All right. Moving on to the Middle East, Hamas says is showing flexibility in talks with mediators and the U.S. So a Hamas official said Monday that the group has been showing flexibility in Gaza ceasefire deal in talks with Qatari and Egyptian mediators, as well as in direct talks with the U.S. So the Hamas spokesman said, "We have shown flexibility in dealing with the efforts of mediators and the Trump's envoy, and we are awaiting the results of the upcoming negotiations to ensure Israel abides by the agreement and proceeds to the second phase. The negotiations conducted with Egyptian and Qatari mediators, as well as Trump's envoy, are centered on ending the war, withdrawal, and reconstruction. We have fully committed to the first phase of the agreement, and our priority now is to shelter and provide relief to our people while ensuring a permanent ceasefire." The U.S. official who held direct talks with Hamas, Adam Bowler, said President Trump's special envoy for hostages defended the decision in the face of Israeli criticism and said he thought there was a chance a long-term deal could be reached. But on Monday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio described engagement with Hamas as a one-off that didn't make any progress. Rubio said that was a one-off situation in which our special envoy for hostages, whose job it is to get people released, has had an opportunity to directly talk to someone who has control over these people and was given permission and encouraged to do so. And then this is from Rubio referring to Trump's special envoy for the Middle East, Steve Witkoff. As of now, it hasn't borne fruit doesn't mean what he was wrong to try, but our primary vehicle for negotiations will continue to be Mr. Witkoff and the work he's doing through Qatar. Both Rubio and Witkoff are headed to Saudi Arabia to meet with Ukrainian officials. From there, Witkoff is expected to travel to Qatar for talks on Gaza, and he said on Monday that a deadline is needed for the next phase of the ceasefire agreement. Israel has been tightening its blockade of Gaza and cut electricity on Sunday, using it as collective punishment in an attempt to pressure Hamas to release more hostages without a full Israeli withdrawal or a commitment to a permanent truce. Hamas continues to insist that it wants to enter the second phase of the initial deal, which Israel is now in violation of. The spokesman said Hamas wouldn't give in to Israeli pressure. He explained Israelis' talk of military plans to resume fighting in Gaza and its decision to cut off electricity are failed options that pose a threat to its captives, who will only be freed through negotiations. Okay, next up here, Israeli minister, Trump's plan to cleanse Gaza taking shape. So Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich said that President Donald Trump's proposal to remove all Palestinians from Gaza and build refugee cities in other Arab states was slowly coming together. Smotrich, who heads the religious Zionism party, asserted that a plan to cleanse Gaza of Palestinians was now in the works. He said the plan is taking shape with the ongoing actions in coordination with the U.S. administration. This has the potential to create a historic change in the Middle East and for the state of Israel. Last week, Smotrich traveled to Washington to meet with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Under the Joe Biden administration, the Israeli finance chief was effectively barred from visiting the U.S. following his calls to annex the occupied West Bank and statements that it was moral and justified for Israel to starve all Gazans to death. Trump has said he wants to clean out and take over Gaza in order to create the Riviera of the Middle East. The president explained that the proposal would call for the permanent removal and resettlement of Palestinians. Smotrich, who has repeatedly called for the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, argued to the Knesset that Trump's proposal presented an opportunity to bring an end to the conflict with the Palestinians. He added, "Until today, we have been dragging this on for 76 years, searching for solutions. With the current U.S. administration, we will do much more." The finance minister explained that Palestinians could be rounded up and removed in 6 months to a year. Just to give you an idea, if we removed 10,000 people a day, 7 days a week, it would take just 6 months. If we remove 5,000 people a day, it will take a year. Of course, this is assuming we have countries that are willing to take them, but these are very, very long processes. Last month, Smotrich said that the project of expelling Palestinians would start slow but accelerate over time. He said, "It is a process that is going to start in the coming weeks. Even if it starts at a slower pace, bit by bit, it will gather speed and intensity." And so I think we should be very concerned that Israel is really thinking of following through with this plan to ethnically cleanse Gaza. All right, next up here, Israeli troops killed 5 Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. So on Tuesday, the Palestinian Authority said Israeli troops killed at least 5 Palestinians in the occupied West Bank over the previous 24-hour period as the Israeli military continued raids in the territory as a part of the operation that was launched in January. The PA said 5 Palestinians, including a 60-year-old woman, were killed by Israeli forces in the northern city of Jenin, which has been the focus of the Israeli offensive dubbed Iron Wall. The PA said that its own forces killed a Palestinian man who was previously wanted. The PA claimed the man had previously opened fire at the Palestinian security forces. Before Israel launched Iron Wall, the PA had been conducting its own operations against resistance groups in Jenin. The PA said that the 60-year-old woman who was killed was shot by IDF troops at checkpoints. Haaretz recently reported that the Israeli military expanding its open fire orders in the West Bank, which has led to an uptick in the killing of civilians, including children. The Israeli military also said that 2 Palestinians during a gun battle in a house in Jenin. The IDF was also active in the southern city of Hebron, where its forces wounded a 16-year-old and a 17-year-old with gunfire. Also on Tuesday, Israeli settlers terrorized civilians in a village near the city of Ramallah. A group of illegal settlers attacked the village of Safa in Ramallah and burned 3 vehicles. Municipal Chief Marswa Saba told Turkey's Anadolu agency, "The situation is tense in the village where Palestinian lives live in constant fear due to the escalation of settler attacks." Settlers have been emboldened by the Israeli military operations, which have involved similar tactics as seen in Gaza, including the forced displacement of tens of thousands of Palestinians and the destruction of civilian infrastructure in Jenin and the Nor Shams refugee camp. The Washington Post recently reported that Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz told a settler leader that Israel must behave exactly like Gaza in the West Bank. So it's really concerning. All right. Israeli minister said God sent Trump to help build Jewish settlements. So Idit Silman, the Israeli Minister of Environmental Protection, said on Tuesday that God had sent Trump administration to advance the goal of ethnic cleansing in Gaza and building the Jewish settlements in the Strip. According to Haaretz, Silman, a member of Prime Minister Netanyahu's Likud party, said that the government is committed to the idea of encouraging immigration and added that she believes God has sent us the U.S. administration and is clearly telling us it's time to inherit the land. Silman vowed that Gush Khalif, a Jewish settlement in Gaza that was evacuated in 2005, would return. It could be in a single-family homes or Trump-style towers, but we will definitely go back there. I see no other solution to terrorism. The answer to terrorism is sovereignty. Silman said the only solution for the Strip is to empty it of Gazans, an option she said is realistic. Other extremist members of Netanyahu's government have welcomed President Trump's calls for Palestinians to be removed permanently, including, as we just talked about, Bezalel Smotrich. A couple stories on Syria here. The first I just want to mention, Israel condemns the Syrian government as Al-Qaeda terrorist, which is true, and this is something that we have been talking about. The concern here is that if Israel and people like Lindsey Graham, as I discussed on the most recent episode of the Kyle Anzalone show, are worried that Syria is full of terrorists, this could mean that they're gearing up for military operations in Syria to, I guess, make up for the fact that they conducted a regime change against Bashar al-Assad and just led to an absolute horror show. And again, Al-Qaeda taking over the country. So next up here, this one from Jason Ditz. Syria's HTS says security operations against Alawites, more than 1,300 killed. So starting on Thursday, the Syrian Harit Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, brutal anti-Alawite crackdown raged through the weekend, with excess of 1,300 people killed, more than 1,000 of them civilians by some accountings. The HTS government has declared the operation over. So public reckoning of what has happened is likely far from over. Through the Defense Ministry announced on Monday that they had accomplished their mission and had neutralized Alawite militias in the region, though they refer to them as the Syrian Arab Army because the narrative is that they're the remnant forces of Assad's government. They also claim victory across Tartarus and Latakia governments. The fighting against militias is only a fraction of the story, though, as the Defense Ministry and Interior Ministry's forces carried out mass execution of Alawite civilians in the area. And while they say it's over, it's possible that they're really just trying to change the narrative here, because obviously it's a bad look when you're slaughtering a bunch of innocent people. And they, told their forces to stop recording themselves doing this. And so it's possible that they're really not stopping. They're just trying to make it seem like they are. And then they're going to pit this back up, and hopefully from their perspective, just with less publicity. Last up, Yemen's Houthis announced renewed blockade on Israeli ships due to a lack of aid in Gaza. This really just goes to show that all the violence happening in the Middle East, not all of it, but the violence happening in the Middle East in response to the Israeli genocide in Gaza could be ended if Israel would end its genocide, but Israel is refusing to. And so now the Houthis are going back to war with Israel. We will see what actions the Houthis take over this next week, if it's maybe just targeting shipping, or if they're going to actually fire some more missiles and drones at Israel. All right, everybody, that will do it for the show today. I will be back with another episode of the Kyle Anzalone Show later this afternoon at 4:45, so be sure to tune into that. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and donate to the Libertarian Institute fundraiser. Thanks, everyone.